here with you guys. So, all right, we'll get started. Yeah. Okay, so today we're going to talk about being the church and fostering families, and we are with the Lily Initiative, which is here at Evangel. So, yeah, we'll dive right into it, you guys. All right, so my name is Annika, as I had mentioned. I've been on staff here at Evangel for 7 years, 3 years overseeing the Lily Initiative. This is my family. That's my husband, Sam. I don't know if he looks familiar to you guys, but he is a pastor here at Evangel. He's a reach pastor, so missions, care, benevolence, that kind of thing. He does kind of a lot. So that's my husband, Sam. We have a 4-year-old named Greta. She is spicy from the get-go. And then sweet Rosalie, just a little honey, and she's 19 months. So, yeah, we love being here in Bismarck. Grew up in Bismarck. Sam grew up in Dickinson, but we love being a part of Evangel and the AG Network. So,
yeah. And my name is Sierra. So I have gotten to be kind of a part of the Lily Initiative since we got started with it. Mm-hmm. Me and my husband are also foster parents, so we've been fostering for a little over 5 years. So this is my husband, Joe. We've been married for just about 8 years. And then these are our 2 daughters, Drew and Kiara. So Drew is 16 and Kiara is 14. And then we also are fostering a little girl who just turned 14 months, and we've had her for just about a year. Mm-hmm. And we have a little baby boy on the way. So the girls we were able to adopt in August of 2022, but they've been living with us. We adopted them through foster care, so they've been with us for just about 5 years. Mm-hmm. And then for work, I work as a social worker. I work as a social worker for a local nonprofit. We do in-home visiting for prenatal moms and after baby's born.
Yeah. Okay, so how did we get here, the Lily Initiative? So essentially, in 2020, when everything was kind of everywhere, people were coming back from, Europe, and so basically, our lead pastor, Pastor Josh Aldahl, he had just been bringing up, how do we care for kids? How do we care for families? And Pastor Alicia, who is our care pastor here at the church, who's actually my manager who oversees me, and she had a meeting with him and had said, hey, can we put some legs to what you're talking about? Because it sounds like you want to support foster families. Since it's 2020, we were all home, and my job kind of shifted. I went from overseeing Reach, our missions department here, and then just shifted into how can we care intentionally for kids and families that are in a vulnerable state in our community. And so we met with an organization called Backyard Orphans, and they did a workshop here for us, and they essentially just helped us try to figure out what on earth do we want to do? How do we want to do this? And and so basically, I know you're from a church. Are you from a church? You're a missionary, my friend. And so no matter what you may be stepping into, caring for kids and families, even in different ways on the mission field, I just want to encourage you with this story, even just the provision for what the Lily Initiative has been able to do. And it all started with our friend Lorelei. Lorelei and her husband were farmers, and they had, I think, 2 bio kids, and then after that they just thought, man, we just really want to care for the orphan. We want to care for kids in a very special way. And so they started the adoption process, and they adopted a few kids overseas, and then they were like, but there's kids here that need care and a home that would love them and show them Jesus. And so they started fostering, and then her husband actually tragically passed away in a farming accident. And she had to come to that pivotal moment of, am I going to continue doing this? Am I going to continue inviting kids into my home and caring for them despite the loss of my husband? And she said yes. And so from the time that she lost her husband, they had adopted 10 kids without her husband and continued fostering. And so she actually in 2020 passed away, and her daughter later, when they had finalized this estate, came and talked with Pastor Josh and was like, hey, we settled mom's estate, and this is the amount that we want to give to an orphan care ministry. Not knowing that we actually were in the works of the Lily Initiative, not even, I think we just had our workshop with Backyard Orphans, and we kind of had an idea of what our legs were going to look like. And just the provision of what the Lord wants to do in and through the church to support families, vulnerable families. We were able to fulfill our dream number, literally the number we wrote down of like, what would it take to get this started, was supplied by a woman's estate who actually lived this out. And so it's beautiful because we know that the Lord wants restored families. He wants whole families, and sometimes that's not the case. That's not the outcome, but as a church, we still seek for those opportunities. So, as well, our lead pastors adopted a daughter, and her name's actually Lily, which is kind of a little like, hey, it's Lily, the Lily Initiative. But it also is in the folder. You can kind of see more backstory too. But Matthew 6:33, the lilies of the field and how they are special. That's really like the verse where we pull our name from. So. Okay, so some statistics. We have 70 AG churches on our North Dakota network, which is awesome. We are a smaller network, but I see strength in that number. That's amazing. And then 75% of foster families actually burn out after 2 years due to lack of support. And we'll talk about what that support looks like. But that's a huge problem. If there are kids who are waiting in the system, who are sleeping in offices, those are families and homes that are closing, opportunities for these kids to have a bit of normalcy and honestly to encounter Christ. And so that was a huge factor of why we started the Lily Initiative. Was we know there's a huge issue even in our local community of kids in the system and families who are just hurting. But that number, we want to lower that number. So, and then we have about 1,400 kids in the North Dakota foster care system according to July. So that's kind of where we sit.
And just a note, like logistics-wise, about that number, like the 14, 15, they changed it recently how they zone for foster care. And so it used to be per like zone or county. And so the county you got licensed in, or the area you were licensed in, that's who you would get kids, like if kids were removed in that area. Well, to date, because of the number of foster homes closing or the lack of foster homes, they've actually shifted it to a statewide licensing. And so sometimes you'll have a child removed in a bigger town, you know, like Bismarck or something like that, but then be moved to a licensed foster home that's open and available in a more rural community or farther away. So even if you don't live in a very big community with lots of kids being removed, the opportunity for foster parents to provide a safe home and take kids in could be from outside of your community as well.
Yeah. Okay, so what is actually happening in North Dakota? What does this look like? So according to the North Dakota Task Force, these are the 3 factors why foster families have not renewed their licenses. First, it's lack of support from the licensing agency. Second, it's lack of support from the custodial agency. And 3, it wasn't what they had expected. And Sarah, do you want to touch on those agencies a little bit for us?
Yeah, so the licensing agency, like I mentioned, is like a state agency. And so they're the ones who come into your home and do your background checks, your home studies. And then the state also provides all of the training requirements to become a licensed foster parent. And so that's what the licensing is. And then every other year, you meet with a licensing worker who comes into your home and kind of follows up with support and how it's kind of going, and then renews your license every year. The custodial agency would be the human service zone that has custody of a child. So when a child comes into foster care, that social worker actually takes custody. And so when we talk about foster parents feeling a lack of support, that would be coming from their case manager. Then it wasn't what they expected. I feel like that sometimes points to maybe the lack of understanding going into it. It's a pretty minimal training that you go through starting. They've revamped that over the last couple of years. But I think there's a lot of misinformation around like what the adoption process could look like, what reunification looks like. But that's where that piece comes from.
Yeah.
All right, so why does this matter? So we're going to talk a little bit. I'm just going to kind of share my story a little bit, kind of our journey into foster care, how the Lily Initiative impacted that, and why we're doing this workshop and why I think that this matters for churches around the state. And I want to talk a little bit of that piece of burnout and kind of how it got to be there. So bear with me for a second. This is going to kind of be the underside of foster care, so it'll be a lot of the harder parts that we've kind of endured. So my husband and I, we'd been married for about 2 years. We had just moved back to North Dakota and bought our first home. And at the time, even when we were dating, we had mentioned like, oh, foster care would be so great to do one day. Maybe we'll adopt one day. Not really having a lot of solid plans of what that would look like. But then we started to hear, my older sister was a foster parent at one point. We had a couple of friends who had considered it, or people that we knew. And we started to hear stories of the incredible lack of licensed foster homes and the incredible surplus of kids coming into care. So much so that there was kids in our community in Bismarck that were being removed from homes and having to spend the night sleeping in an office at social services, because when social workers called, there was no foster homes available or open to take these kids. And that was just something that just didn't sit right with us. One of the verses that me and my husband kind of had at a point in our marriage that we wanted to be kind of a core of what we believed was James 1:27, which talks about true and acceptable religion in the sight of God is looking after orphans and widows in their distress. And this seemed to be that. And so, you know, some foster parents will say like, oh, God just called us to do this, and so we stepped into it. And we never really had that specific moment of like, you're going to be a foster parent, like this is what you're going to do. It was more so that we knew that saying yes to this was something that we knew God would provide for, give us grace for, and open the doors for. And it seemed to align so much with the heart of who God is providing and caring for these kids in these times. So we kind of just started. So we, you know, reached out to the agency. I remember sitting in my car making that call. I'm like, hi, my name is Sierra. Like, what do we do? And they're like, oh yeah, absolutely. Just send us your information. We got you. Like, and we rolled through the process really quick. So we got our home studies done, our background checks. We went to our weekend class, and all of a sudden we got this foster care license saying that me and my husband were licensed to foster 4 kids ages 0 to 21. And 12 hours after we got our license approved, like I said, the ink was barely dried on that when it was signed. We got a call for our very first foster placement, a 3-year-old little boy. And from that moment, when we stopped by at the social service office, we walked in, and I don't know what I was expecting, but they're like, hey, this is our friend Joe and Sierra, you're going with them now. And then we drove away with this 3-year-old who was now in our care and we were responsible for. And so that first year in foster care, we learned how much we needed to learn. And these feelings of burnout that we've talked about, these 75% of foster parents feeling, we felt those. So I'm going to talk a little bit kind of about what that looked like. So we jumped in and realized quickly the physical, emotional, spiritual, and financial toll that foster care can take on a family. So just physically, this particular little boy, his average was waking up about 15 times a night. He had a lot of sleep issues due to trauma. And so we just went from our cozy 8 hours a night to no sleep. But then also adjusting our schedules from, you know, us working our jobs to now fitting in court dates and social worker visits and bio family visits and therapies and BSEP appointments and all these different things that we didn't know to have beforehand. And then just some of the financial toll. So shortly after we got our first little boy, we had a couple other things kind of transition, and so it was actually the girls that came to us shortly after. We had another placement. So we went from no kids to 4 kids ranging from 3 to 14 years old within a matter of 4 months, which was a big change for us.
And how old were you at this time?
I was 24.
Yeah.
24. So I knew a lot. So we kind of quickly realized too, even financially. So the state, and we'll talk about this a little bit more too.
Yeah.
But the state does offer a stipend for foster parents to help with costs of like clothes and extra food. You know, having that many teenagers in our house, we're like, we need to buy more food. But there's a lot of things that when you jump that quickly that aren't covered by the state. So things like we didn't have enough beds or bedding or, you know, laundry baskets or, you know, laundry soap, shampoo, you know, just so many different things that now all of a sudden we had to have in our home because we had these kids. And so it was kind of a sudden financial burden. And then emotionally too, we quickly found that as we stepped into foster care, secondhand trauma was now just a part of our lives. We found ourselves being up late at night after the kids went to bed, submitting child abuse and neglect reports, because as the kids were in our home longer and felt more safe and secure, we would be sitting around the dinner table and they would tell us stories of abuse or trauma that they had that the state hadn't known about yet that we had to report. And that just became like a Tuesday night. And so it was just something that kind of came hard and fast, and realizing that as much as these kids were stepping into our story and our life, we were stepping into their story and their mess and their pain. And then not only that, so now we have these kids that we just met but love so fiercely and want to protect, and so now we're going to courts and child family team meetings, wanting to advocate for them and their needs and what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. And that system, when it comes to foster care, we live in a broken world and it's a broken system, and foster care is the result of families that are broken. And so navigating that was heavy and it was painful at times, watching decisions that were made very far outside of our control. And then even walking along bio parents, we realized what a spiritual warfare there was too. We were stepping into a lot of generational trauma, generational addiction. And I think anytime you start a new ministry too, the devil looks for a foothold, right? And so there was lots of areas on my health and different things that we saw the enemy try to attack. And so there was this level, like kind of all those different areas I kind of mentioned, that physical, emotional, there was this level of grief and burnout that we hit really early. And the thing about being a parent, being a foster parent, there's not really like a time out, there's not really like a clock out time period, it kind of is your whole life. And so we kind of found ourselves feeling so overwhelmed by the pain that came with it. And then also at this time, a lot of our friends didn't have any kids yet, much less, kids getting called to principal's office or starting fights in middle school or getting their period at school. Some of those things we were navigating. We had preteens, and so it was kind of that feeling of like, this is so different than what we anticipated on top of all of these things. So those feelings of burnout, I don't think it was because we didn't have education, or I don't think there was anything that we were doing wrong. I think it was just such an enormous thing to step into that I don't think it was created for one person to carry alone. And that's where those burnout feelings came from. And grief too. Our first little boy that we had him for almost 2 years before he left our home. And so he was my first introduction to being a mom. And I was responsible for every part of his life until all of a sudden I'm not his mom anymore. And so that can be really draining too, kind of walking through those periods of grief. So I say all of those things to say, I want to talk a little bit about a couple experiences we had, specifically with the Lily Initiative and how it helped us keep going. So 5 years, unfortunately, in foster care is sometimes seen as like long-term foster parent, because there is such a high burnout rate. And so the things that we've seen sustain us. And so there was a moment with our girls, they were about 9 and 11 when they moved in, where I was a little bit of a loss, not being fully sure how to teach them everything they needed to know, how to walk through all of their trauma with them, and just do all of these things just like really quickly. I felt like all this pressure of like, there's so much that I need, and I was feeling really at loss to how to provide for some of these things. But God knew that, and he saw us, and he saw them, and he knew this story. And so at the time, we were at church. There was a specific Sunday at church where it all started, where we ran into one of my friends' moms, who I'd known kind of throughout the years just because of my close friend. And she had come up to us and said that she felt God was putting on her heart to like reach out to us specifically to be a support for the girls. And we didn't really know what that looked like. She didn't really know what that looked like. But I think God kind of knew what was needed for them and us in that moment. So we call her the OG grandparent. And so we'll talk a little more about this team and how it kind of evolved to be duplicated to more people across our church. But Dana, her name's Dana, stepped in a role that we didn't have. So me and my husband's parents both live out of state. So we didn't really have that grandparent role. So she showed up, and she started showing up to soccer practices and volleyball games and orchestra concerts and bringing, Valentine's Day baskets and Easter baskets and May Day, lots of baskets. Christmas presents. She brought them Bibles and would write verses in the fronts of their Bibles, and she taught them how to sew. And her husband, Grandpa, taught them how to check cattle and ride four-wheelers, which they did not tell me about until later. Kiara's like, do you know how fast Drew was driving? I'm like, don't tell me. I don't want to know. But the most important thing we saw come out of that is they had someone who spoke truth and life and identity into them. She consistently, to date, again, they're 14 and 16, so for almost 5 years, she tells them who they are in Christ and who defines them, not what defines them. And she's walked through a lot of things with them. And unbeknownst to her, when she started all of this, they came to our home combating so many lies and destruction that was spoken over them by their biological family, and so many things that were cursed for them. She brought life to and spoke words of affirmation and authority over them. And also now they know, which is so, it's going to make me cry. They know that someone is like interceding for them in prayer. And just the power of that going through like the foster care system and adoption at such a vulnerable age, to know like, hey, this person who's been so consistent for me, and the very few in their lifetime who have, is now praying for me and going to God on my behalf every day. Like the power in that has just been incredible. And so that's one area that has just been so meaningful for us and for them, and just to kind of see what's come out of the fruit that's come out of that has been, like I said, such a direct coordination from God. Then another experience I kind of want to talk about is about 2 years ago, we got a call. So you ever have those mornings or those days where you're like journaling and praying, you're like, God, what's next for me? Like, if there's something you want me to do, which is just like so dangerous when your phone rings right after that and says Burley County Social Services, and I'm like, oh, that was so fast. Okay. He answer prayers, folks. So we got that call right after, and they asked if we would take a sibling set of 3. They were 8, 9, and 15 at the time. And so at that time we had just had the 2 girls, and we had kind of fallen to some comfortability, kind of living with just the 4 of us. And we knew, my husband knew the system well enough to know that if they said, can they stay for the weekend, it might turn into something longer. And it turned into 1.5 years that they were with us. And so we went from that call within a few hours to a family of 7, which is just a big adjustment. We are just like really regular people, not really prepped to have like this big family. We didn't even have the right vehicle. Like we had to take 2 vehicles for a long time because we couldn't even fit all these kids. And so when we said yes because there, that guidance from the Holy Spirit saying like, I'm calling you, I got you, like, like going before you type of thing. So we said yes. All right, we'll be there in a couple hours. Okay, and you're just like, there's just that moment of peace of like, all right, like he's gonna sustain us. This is good. And then that was the moment I really like. I stood up. We're like, all right, let's get prepped for them, And I felt like Peter in the water, kind of looking around. I'm like, wait a minute. We are not ready for 3 more kids. We were in the middle of doing construction in our kitchen. We didn't have bedrooms set up for this. We didn't have enough beds yet. Like, there was just so many, all the practical things of like, okay, now you have 5 different schools to drop these kids off in the morning. And you both work, just things like that started coming up. And I'm like, oh no. So I called Annika. I'm like, hey, what you doing? We have these kids coming. And the Lily Initiative really just like activated. And so there was a day shortly after they came, and this was right before Christmas too, and they walked in the door with a backpack or 2. They didn't have socks or underwear, just the shoes they're wearing, that no winter coats, that kind of thing. And so she kind of arranged a day for us and came over and said, like, hey, you guys go to Target. You guys need to get some stuff for school. And the kids got to go Christmas present shopping for each other, which is the first time they ever got to buy presents for each other. And while we were gone, a whole team from our church came to our house, and they, I always call it like boggle. You like shake it up and all the rooms rearranged. They like boggled our rooms, and so they set up all the bed frames that the kids needed and brought in new mattresses and set up like nightstands and lamps and laundry baskets and bedding, and they painted our kitchen and brought a meal over, and Christmas presents that were wrapped, and just took away some of those tangible, like practical things that felt really overwhelming at the time for me. And so instead of me having to like put together these bed frames and like try to focus on all this stuff, I got to go spend time getting to know them and helping them feel comfortable with our family and just helping that transition for them. These kids were pulled out of a motel room in the middle of the night due to domestic violence and substance use, and so the trauma they felt, and then getting to come into a home that was like ready for them. We came home that day and they had Christmas presents under the tree with their names on it. And so that sounds like such a normal, simple thing, but they asked us, like, where did these come from? Like, who's Evangel? Like, what's happening? And I got to explain to them, like, this is the body of Christ. Like, you are so loved and valued just for who you are, that, like, you're worth all these people that don't even know you, spending their Saturday, like, wrapping their presents and setting up your bed. And, like, this is how the hands and the feet of Jesus are, like, designed to work. Like, this is how God created us to function as a church. And it wasn't me just telling them this, like, church is good to go to. Like, it was something living and active, that tangible, that they could see and experience. And so from that, some of the experiences we've gotten to expose them to. I remember sitting in church one day with them, and their bio dad came with, and one of our prior foster children, and his adopted mom, and our girls' bio mom, and some of my biological sisters. We were just like a whole pew, and we took a family picture at the end of that service, and everyone's like, what? I'm like, it's just this is a lot going on. But to seeing them all stand there and like worship God together and have that experience of like doing that together and seeing who God is. So I say that because I don't think all those people came to church or got those experiences, or the kids got to tell us about the times like they'd go to camp and accept Christ, or we'd have those nights of prayer in our home. And I don't think that is all because me and Joe are just these like special people who did all the right things. It's really not that. It's because every person in our church who decided to wrap their arms around us and our kids and like step out and give of their time and their talents and their to pray for us, to provide for us, to show up with groceries, to do what they needed to be able to sustain us to keep doing these things and taking these calls. And so I think that's why this matters. I think this matters because there's still that urgency today across the state. There are those kids getting pulled from these homes and needing a safe place, and they're going to go somewhere. And what better place than like for our church families to be able to open up their doors and say, like, yes, come into our home. Let's use this as an opportunity, like, to love you and teach you who Christ is. So no matter what this story ends as, you've met who Christ is. And I think that's such an opportunity. And this discipleship opportunity, it has so many more ripples. We'll talk a little bit more about it. But you're discipling these foster kids. Your programs, initiatives like this help teach families like what foster care is, and it helps us stay on mission. Because we've had, nights together in worship where it's easy to get really wrapped up in the system of it, the frustrations with this and that, and the process of it. But really pulling people back to like, this is a mission field. These are opportunities to share the love of Christ in our community, in our backyard. And so it really is such an opportunity. And an opportunity for the church to sustain these families, so that like me and myself and Joe, when we get the call, we can say yes because we know we're backed by the body of Christ. That's going to be there with us.
All right, well, how on earth do we do this? How do we do this? How did we do this?
That's your part of the presentation.
Well, essentially, it's a call to foster care. So whether that's a family who's like, yes, like, we're going to go get licensed, we're going to go get all of this training and everything, it's a call. Like, it is a commitment. It is something that you are welcoming these kids and their families into your home, into your life. It is the almost like the perfect example of hospitality, honestly. But not everyone is able to do that. Some of our team members are like, I would love to foster, but here's my reason why I can't right now. And it's usually a right now thing, not like a never, like I would never do this. But this, like the Lily Initiative has really, yes, come alongside foster and adoptive families, but also it's been really a beautiful way to see the church, our church family, engage in very practical ways, joining teams and supporting in very specific ways. And I'll get into like what our teams are. But we started the Lily Initiative because we knew we had about 15 or so families at the time in our church family who were already fostering. We had Joe, or we had Sierra at least come. Joe didn't come. But we had a few other foster families come to our workshop with Backyard Orphans and had asked them, like, what do you want? Like, how do you want to be supported? We're not just building teams to build teams. Like, we are building teams to sustain you. So tell us what you want, and we'll go from there. And so it's super important to include the families who are on the front lines already. And now today we have about like 37 or 38 foster families that we support through the Lily Initiative in our church family. So ever since the Orphan Sunday that we had about almost 3 years ago, we've been able to raise up foster families and support them, which is really amazing, and only God can do that. So, but the really neat thing about these teams that I'll dive into is that you'll notice that it almost takes like very specific giftings in those teams. And we could go on for story of what the Lord has done through our family to impact not just the foster families, but the kids that are coming in and out of their homes and the bio families too. So what I would say is if you were to ever create like a support ministry, just make it simple and keep it intentional. And I think that's just kind of across the board, you guys. Like that's like a daily, like if you want to be a Christ follower and just in just serving people well, just make it simple and keep it intentional. Intentionality is huge. And so you can start a support ministry, whether your church wants to do that. You have enough people to do that, to create teams and then activate them when things come up. You can finance and reimburse foster families. And even sometimes we have opportunities for bio families. We've had those opportunities come up where we can support those families. And that's just huge. I mean, even just what Sierra had mentioned, all of the bedding and, I mean, everything. Like, that was a big weight lifted off of shoulders. Mm-hmm. And your church wants to support these families. They want to come alongside of them because not everyone can give of their time, but they can give of their finances. So that is a huge part of this. And then again, just going back to intentionality, you can be there for these families. You can be the listening ear. We have like people praying over our families consistently with everything that's coming on and coming into their home. And so that's just a huge part of it. Okay, so creating support teams, the whole point is everyone can do something. Everyone can do something, whether that is you are getting licensed to become a foster family or becoming a team member to support foster families. And so everyone can do something. Our Lily Initiative teams are the grandparents team. I'll go through them. But the grandparents team, which was literally designed after Dana. Dana was the OG. She was already doing it. And just naturally, that's just her gifting. She is so relational. She is willing to ask questions like, hey, like, can I pick the girls up? She bought them ice skates, right? Mm-hmm. And their Christmas present was ice skate lessons and ice skates, right? Yep. Like, she's intentional. She's asking them. She's listening to them. Like, what are your interests? What are you wanting to learn? She would bring them shopping all the time and go to the dollar store and let them pick out items, but then would also teach them, this is how you budget. This is how you, just really like things that you would think a grandparent would kind of own in their own grandchild's life. Dana was doing that, and so we built that team around what Dana was already doing. And some really cool stories have come from the grandparents team. One other family that we have that we support, there was a team member that was on board, and she's like, I want to care for a family. I would love to be a grandparent. And so we matched them with one of our other foster families, and she stepped into this home holding hair back while kids were puking. Like, she walked in during the flu season and she owned it, and she showed up for them, and she cared for them in a variety of ways. But then she like went on vacation with them, and she literally became their grandma. They as well don't have parents here in town, and so it was really just a unique opportunity for this family to experience someone who would come in and swoop in and care for them and love them in that way. Presents. I think she dressed up as Santa Claus for Christmas and brought like a tote of like presents. So yeah, that's Tony. Tony's great. Yeah, and then we have our babysitting team. So we do background checks on all of our team members and create a babysitting list, because I mean, as a mom, I mean, we don't even have like a list of people who we trust to watch our kids, because I haven't had the time to create that. But we created it for these parents because they have a lot going on, and they are people from our church who have received trauma training. They have been background checked. They have been talked face to face, so we know they're not, crazy people. Background check would also cover that too. But we have a babysitting team so that they can call on and say, hey, we need a date night. Hey, I need a break. I need someone to come in and watch these kids so I can just take a breath. And so we have a babysitting team available for families. Meals and errands team. This team is flexing on the weekly, you guys. It's been really awesome to see. Again, with foster families, sometimes it's hard for them to ask for help because they chose this. But it's been amazing to see them ask for assistance. Like, hey, we're getting a kiddo at 5 o'clock today. I'm getting off of work at 5, somehow getting this kiddo. I have no idea what they're coming with, if they have, what clothes they have, whatever. And you don't know their story. You don't know anything. You just get the call and you accept it. And so we've been able to activate teams to run and go to Walmart, go to Target, someone please bring them a meal, because they need to actually be able to interact with these kids rather than making dinner and then not even knowing who they are by the time that they sit down at their dinner table. So we have had this family, Tony's family actually, who's the grandparent with this family. Their family, they are actually an emergency shelter family, so they get kind of an array, crazy stuff. A lot of things happen for these kids, and so they come into their home, and there's this one situation where foster mama reached out and said, hey, we have these kids coming to our house. We don't know what's going on, but we know that they've come from something very tragic and traumatic. And so she's like, they have nothing. They literally have nothing. They're coming from the hospital because they needed to be checked before coming. And so we were able to have team members show up to their house with diapers, with clothes, because they didn't have anything, and then meals, like a hot comfort meal. I mean, a comfort meal does wonders to begin with, but like when you're in that crisis mode, it means the world. And so we had caseworkers that were coming in and out of the home. There were FBI that were coming in and out of the home, and they were wondering, who are these extra people just coming and showing up to this house? And the foster mom looked at them in the eye and said, this is our church. They're showing up for us, and I don't have to lift a finger. I just get to care for this child right now. And so that was really beautiful to see that. And then we have our unification team. And for lack of better terms, this team has evolved since we've started. And honestly, we're just kind of learning as we go, but we've had really beautiful opportunities to support bio families after they've been reunified with kids that have been in our foster families' homes. And so we have, for example, we've had 2 bio mamas who've been reunified with their kiddos that need vans because they have like 4 or 5 kids and they can't get anywhere because they don't have a car. So they couldn't come to church, they couldn't make it to youth, they couldn't do any of those things. And so I remember one day my captain, Leslie Piercy, who helps oversee the Lily Initiative as well, we just sat down and we just prayed, and we're like, Lord, we need vans, we need transportation for this family, and we have no idea where that's coming from. 2 weeks later, I get an email from a foster mom of ours actually who's like, I want to donate my van. I don't know why. God's told me to donate this. So it's yours. Who can you give it to? And so we were like, oh my goodness, like, we know at least one mama, and now we need to get another one. And then another van fell into our lap. And so it's just, again, another affirmation of that he will provide for these families. And that what an amazing moment sitting in the DMV with these moms, just hearing their story and then also affirming them of like, oh, but that's where God was, like, he was so with you in that moment, and man, he pulled you out of that, and I'm so excited for what's coming for you and your family. And so whether it's vans or setting up apartments or homes, just getting them honestly acclimated back into their life with their kids, because depending on if they've been at treatment or prison or any other situation, they are acclimating back to a lifestyle that they've been out of for a while, parenting. We have a bio mama who's being mentored right now by one of our team members, and who's reading the Bible with her, asking her questions, helping her make goals, and encouraging her. Honestly, it's just the biggest part is encouragement for that team. Did you want to touch on anything that I just said?
Oh, we did great.
Okay. So the biggest part, though, sorry, I just went ahead of that, but the biggest part is if you guys are able to support families financially, that's huge. Kids financially, I mean, even like kids that are in your youth group, you know, I'm assuming you might have some that come in. I don't know if you have any foster families in your church, but if you can do one thing, choose, you know, if it's supporting them financially, if it's taking intentional time with them and understanding, maybe even that family, what is your need and how can we meet that, maybe in the simplest way. I think they just want to feel seen and known ultimately. Yeah. I'm going to go back to that because I went a little ahead.
And then, engaging in your local community too. So do you want to talk on this a little more since you've met with some of our directors?
So since we started the Lily Initiative, a big key in this was if you're going to start something like this, you need to get to know your local community. So get to know our Burleigh County director who oversees human services. So creating a relationship, honestly. So I was just there last week dropping off an appreciation basket because they had a really hard last 3 weeks. And they need to know that there is a church in their city who's for them. They see really hard things. They sometimes are the bad guys because they maybe do something incorrectly, or maybe they step on toes. They're human. We're human. Nobody makes, everyone makes mistakes. And so essentially just engaging and creating a relationship with them so that you have a pulse on how are your caseworkers doing, because your caseworkers are the ones who your families are interacting with. We want to make sure that they're feeling supported too, because that can be honestly one of the biggest headaches for foster families is the relationship between their caseworker. And if their caseworker, which they are overloaded with cases, unfortunately, they will feel burnt out, and we don't want that either. So,
and I think that's one of the things we've seen be such a ripple effect from the Lily Initiative. So like I mentioned, there's a licensing agent that comes to every foster family's home every year to relicense, and there's like a whole interview process they go through. And I was visiting with ours, and she had talked about the Lily Initiative foster families, so foster families specifically that attend Evangel. Mm-hmm. And through my job and just through some background and connections, I'm able to kind of hear some of the conversations that's being had at a county and a state level. And there is a noticeable difference that these caseworkers are seeing that families coming from the church, which is how it should be, right? Mm-hmm. Like that they're seeing these families being supported and having grace and like walking in strength, and like what a testimony to who God is, that they're able to see such a difference in the families that they're working with. Yeah. And so it's been such a testimony to so many caseworkers, to so many state workers, and that's just been such a cool side effect too. And then the last one we want to talk about is kind of preaching it from the pulpit. And so Annika had mentioned our lead pastors have gone through the adoption process themselves. But the whole heart behind this is like caring for the orphan and widow in their time of distress, to opening your home, taking those big, scary steps of faith into something like this, was such a heartbeat and undertone of the church even before we launched this initiative. And I think that's so important that it's actually spoken and that call is kind of given and those seeds that are planted, because the seeds are planted in hearts. There are families in churches that are like, me and my husband are like, oh, maybe we could do foster care, maybe that's something we could do. But really watering those seeds and really like pouring into that is so vital. And so I think it's just really important to have a pastor that is like buying into that vision. When we first launched like the idea of this to the church, we had so many families come up to us afterwards and they were just tears and they're saying like, you know, this is something that we thought about, but we think God is actually asking us to do this. And from there we've just seen the number of foster families from our church grow, because they're knowing they're not doing it alone. And so I think just my final thoughts, I think there's been so many like side things we've been able to kind of implement. So we have a connect group just for our foster families where we're able to come and share each other's burdens and pray with each other and support each other. And Annika reaches out to foster families and checks in with them and prays for them. And you get those calls where you're kind of like, I need groceries before I have someone else come stay with me. You know, there's so many of those like tangible things, because that makes such a huge difference. And so even if your church is starting small in what they're offering to foster families, know that those small differences can really hinge whether or not a family is able to continue to say yes and keep going with what God is calling for them to do in their ministry.
Well, anybody have any questions, comments, anything?
I think for me as a single, not being on staff at a church, but being involved in education, I think becoming trauma informed was really helpful in helping me to see how to best support the students that I have.
Absolutely.
I just love what you guys presented, and I'm excited for like how the Lord's expanding that on like a state level. But I think also like for anyone who's not connected to any family, like even just becoming trauma informed is really eye opening.
Oh, it's huge.
Sure.
Even during the trauma informed class that we had for our team members, it was just honestly a realization of like, this is how Jesus would, you know, if he would come to you and he'd just like look at you and he'd say, this is not who you are. He would de-escalate you and he would sit with you in those moments. And that's not just for kids in the foster system. That's for everyone. We all have experienced maybe some form of trauma. And I think that's a valuable training for any follower of Jesus. Like if you can come down to and relate to someone who has experienced trauma, that's a huge relational deposit that you can make in their life. That's what Jesus would do. That's what he does.
Any other questions about any logistics or
I was
more
just thinking about
stories?
like if someone wanted to partner with the Lily Initiative because they don't live in Bismarck, you know, how could you do that?
Yeah, so essentially, I would say, because a lot of it is just like hands-on for like the support teams, but we do fund the Lily Initiative through our legacy makers, which is anything that goes above and beyond the tithes. So the Lily Initiative receives 1% of the legacy maker fundings to do what we do. So I guess I would say that, just because everything else is kind of more so hands-on, but a huge part of it would be prayer too. So I can always reach out to you for those things. So yeah.
Well, thank you guys for coming and listening and being a part of this. We were excited to kind of share. It's been exciting to watch it grow and what it's turned into, and so we appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for coming, guys.
And I think in the folders, there's, Annika, there's a sheet you have in there with a